for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting of the Blackstone Millville Regional School District to order. First order of business is we're going to take I'm going to make a motion to vote to enter into executive session pertaining to superintendent contract and collective bargaining and return to open session at 6:30. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Robin. We'll do a roll call vote, starting with Jane. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. We will return at 6:30. We're going to move to consent agenda A. Approval of warrants, minutes of meeting April 10th and April 15th.
Move to approve the consent agenda A.
Motion made by Ms. Robin,
Second?
second by Mr. Tringali. Any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So moved. We also need to, I'm looking for a motion to vote to adopt the superintendent contract that we finalized with Mr. Alan Himmelberger.
I'll make that motion.
Motion made by Ms. Vanaco, second by Ms. Riggio. Any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Moving forward, report of the superintendent.
Members of the committee, the purpose of tonight's meeting was once again to look at the status of the current FY15 budget and the status of the FY15 assessments to the towns of Millville and Blackstone. And, I was not at the meeting last week in Millville. Perhaps Mr. Tringali or Sanaco did attend a meeting with the Finance Committee and the Selectmen in terms of that discussion.
Okay. I attended that meeting with, Mr. Chaplin and Aaron Vanaco, and our intent was to talk to the Millville Selectmen and request that a 2.5 override proposal would be put on the town warrant, and that was not supported in any way at all. The selectmen would basically not even hear the discussion. They made a very quick decision. Obviously, they had their mind made up before we even appeared. So that's kind of where that was. Again, Millville would not support even additional nickel in additional contribution. However, the first half of that meeting was a presentation by Blackstone Valley Tech, in which they outlined their plan for 3 additional courses of study, which they portrayed as a response to all the students who are going to Norfolk Aggie and schools like that. So their solution to that is let's build some more programs in-house at BVT. So in essence, it would save the town's money. In order to do that, they were looking for an additional contribution, which the Millville Selectmen quite eagerly gave them. And then shortly after, we went up to ask for an additional contribution in the way of an override, and they would not even listen to it. So, was that somewhat accurate?
Mm-hmm.
And then tomorrow, we're going to Blackstone, so we don't have any additional information from Blackstone at this point. I see our chair of the Finance Committee from Millville. Hate to put you on the hot seat, but is there any additional information that we should consider at this point?
I don't have the exact number in front of me, but the additional contribution to BVT, I think it was less than $20,000.
There's $1.66 per household, right?
No, there's 2 things being talked about. There's an additional contribution for this year, and then the project that they're presenting for the expansion. So the debt exclusion is the $1.53 or 63 per day.
So the reality, Mr. Chairman, at this point is that we have no additional information about any additional revenue in the form of support from the towns of Blackstone or Millville do that. In that situation, the committee at our last meeting directed me to go back, working with the administrators, to bring your list of reductions up to that 1.4 million number of what is our current projected deficit if we hold to minimum contribution of the Blackstone Millville Regional School District budget and exclusionary costs at this point to both towns. So the reality is, if you have, I emailed it, but I put a copy in your packet. People in the audience, there are copies of the agenda, but there are copies there. First item in there is just the background PowerPoint of the numbers, but the last item, the last page, is an update on potential budget reductions. And I want to be very clear. The administrators were asked to prepare this. None of the principals, nor the Director of Student Services, nor the Superintendent of Schools are recommending any of these reductions. It is also true, Mr. Chairman, that the school committee is not recommending any of these reductions. The school committee did its work, produced a budget, and in effect, you know, the regular budget was up a little over 2%. The special ed budget was up over a little 6%. You net those two numbers, the total budget was up 3.4%. It is true that because of the assessment issue, where this district does not have available to it that $655,000 of additional money or revenue out of E&D, that the assessment to the towns is up double digit, about 18% in Millville, and about the same amount in the town of Blackstone. But much of that is driven by the fact that last year, the regional district offset its assessment by almost $1 million. So the reality is, the clarification always is the budget versus the assessment. The assessment to both towns is up over 18%. And that is directly related to this revenue shortfall of not having that money from our own excess and deficiency account to move forward with that. So in that spirit, what's on this list represents the thinking of the four principals, along with the Director of Student Services and the superintendent, of how do you come up with the money to deal with that. And again, I emphasize the large number, because it's not a matter of going into our budget and finding $50 here, $75. You know, we're talking $1.4 million in terms of doing that. So the first items are items that the committee has already seen. And again, what we were attempting to do was look at those items, particularly new positions that we currently don't have, and those items are there, making adjustments because of projected student enrollment, and making other adjustments relative to staffing that is outside of the classroom. I just want to clarify one thing, because I did get an email from one of our school nurses. We currently have 5 nurses, all right, which provides us the opportunity particularly at JFK FM, our largest facility for students, to have available 2 nurses. I put the word floating in there, not to imply that that person isn't providing nursing services, but one of the abilities when you have a 5th nurse is, if we have need for additional nursing at one of the other buildings, we have somebody that could do that. We still will have 4 registered, qualified, Department of Education licensed nurses, 1 in each building. And there's no question, you know, that as the request for nursing services continues to rise in all facilities, you know, that's going to put us in a situation, you know, where we would have to rely on perhaps per diem nurses to come in and help out when we're doing something that would require us to have more than 1 nurse in a building in order to do that. So I use the term floating. I'm not implying that that 5th nurse is floating. That person is doing a professional job. And in fact, we did not recommend in part of our budget to reduce that position, right? And similarly with the custodian, you know, we have a custodian that is based here at the middle school, but when there are custodians out for vacation and/or sick, we have the ability to move that person to other buildings to provide coverage. But again, it's not that we don't feel we need that position. We really do feel we need that position, but the reality is, you know, we have that ability with one position, that we can move that person if there's an extended illness in one of the other buildings, or somebody goes on vacation, and we need to have that coverage to do it in terms of that. The supplies and equipment, again, leave it to your administrators. We will find that $40,000 culling through the various accounts, you know, to find that money. The second level, You know, in terms of athletics, I got an email from Ms. Greenstein. Clearly, we're taking $10,000 out of the athletic budget. We had talked about a potential program in golf, that we're not doing that, and the rest of it will come relative supplies and materials. I can't be more specific about it because we have to look at, you know, particular sports. There's some sports, particularly football, you just have to spend the money for safety purposes. I did share with the chairman before the meeting, we've been approached by the town of Hopedale that is currently in a co-op football team with Millis, and they've been notified by Millis that they're going to dissolve the co-op agreement. So they've approached BMR to say, would you be interested in having us co-op? What that means is that they're looking for about 8 to 10 students from Hopedale High School that want to play football. Now, that's not going to be a dramatic, you know, increase in our cost for the program. It does not impact that, but we would be able to collect those athletic fees. That is now in the initial talking stages with the athletic director and the principal at Hopedale High School. All right? We look at the impact on student learning, and this is where it gets very dramatic in terms of finding this money, is this continued discussion of looking at a variety of programs as well as classroom teachers. And in preparing this, the average teacher salary that I'm using is $50,000 in order to you know, give you this projection. The actual savings and/or cost will be borne out when, in fact, the committee makes a decision on the budget. Then I can go back in and recalculate based on the staff. Under state law, teachers without professional teacher status, or what many people still call tenure, those are the most vulnerable staff relative to losing their positions for next year. I must, by state law, notify people by June 15th, but I'll be honest with the committee. This is a decision that I feel professionally I have to give teachers by the beginning of May to let them know that. I have said this at meetings at the schools, that those teachers without professional teachers status are the most vulnerable. And under state law, I can issue letters of non-renewal as required. And I, being very candid and clear, I can't guarantee anybody a job if we don't have the money. And it is my intention by the beginning of May, which is really next week, it's upon us on Thursday, that by next week, I need to have a sense of where we are and issue those letters so that people do have a sense of where do they stand. That's personally and professionally the most appropriate thing we can do. The other impact is certainly in the area of class size, and I met this morning with the leadership, with the principals. I reviewed, particularly in Blackstone, what's the incoming kindergarten class. I'm not recommending a drop from 5 to 4 sections in kindergarten. At this point, the number still is hovering around 100, and I feel, you know, quite frankly, 20 in kindergarten, because we're reducing some of the aid time, is a good investment at this point. You get to the next level, which is what the committee asked me to do, to find another $400,000 reductions. The position of assistant superintendent, the position of a high school math teacher, with an impact on class size and some electives. A social studies position, which again, a loss of electives and larger class size. The department heads, we currently have faculty members in departments that are department heads. They get a stipend. This is what the total stipend reduction would be, but I also want to let you know that under the current contract, department heads teach 4, not 5 classes. So they'd actually go back to teaching 5 because there would be no department heads. And then at the middle school, we would be losing the equivalent of 3 positions. And Mr. Cameron has kind of outlined those positions, and in terms of rotation and loss of elements to his program here at the middle school. All right? They will be pieces. They may not be all of, you know, one person because of that factor. All right? So that gets us up to the total of $1,393,000. I just want to call your attention to the asterisk there, because again, it's important to understand the personnel changes are impacted by state law and contract. There will be additional reductions depending on your decisions, because if we don't need as many art, music, or phys ed, that would be some adjustment that I would have to make. Again, it's a domino effect. When you make a decision, then it could have an effect on some other people. But in terms of planning this document, you have to give me direction as to where to go. One other item that I think is very important for everybody to understand, that the Blackstone Millville Regional School District is responsible for paying unemployment claims. We are a pay-as-you-go system, as all municipalities are. That means we do not pay a percentage of payroll into the unemployment fund. However, because we do not have to make that payment on the payroll, when in fact we get a claim for unemployment, we must pay it. Currently, in this year's budget, you had set aside $150,000 for unemployment, and to date, we've spent $55,000. Somebody said, well, you haven't laid off that many people last year. People need to understand. Somebody that worked for us 3 years ago, because when people file for unemployment, it's not your most recent employer. They go back and look at the history of where you worked. So somebody could make a claim, 3 years out. So unemployment is also a number that we're going to have to factor into the budget. My assumption in the plan is that if we, in fact, lay some staff off and they take health insurance, I've taken no deduction for health insurance. I would simply accrue that savings in health insurance and put it in the line item for unemployment. But there is a very big liability for potential in the unemployment insurance account, all right? Given that we're spending $55,000 this year, and we did not have a significant layoff in the last year of staff. But again, it has nothing to do with the recent layoff. It could be somebody that worked for us 3 years ago, left us, got a job someplace else for a year, and then got laid off from that job. Then they file for a claim, and they look at who was your employer over the last 3 years. And therefore the claim comes back to the Blackstone Millville Regional School District. This is not a recommendation, but this is the difficult task that you asked us to look at in terms of developing your budget. Just by way of class size, based on what we know now, subject to change, but based on what we know now, at JFK FM, if we drop to 4 sections from grades 1 to 5, the 5th grade will end up with class sizes of 29, the 4th grade 25.5, the 3rd grade 22.75, 2nd grade 25.5, and 1st grade at 24.5, and currently we would project 5 sections of kindergarten at 18.5. Over at Millville Elementary, we are anticipating 2 sections of kindergarten, but we are going to reduce the aides. The numbers will be small, but it's too large of a cohort for just one teacher, all right, at this point, based on our numbers. So the numbers there will be about 15 to 16, but they will not be a full-time aide. It will only be the kindergarten teacher. Kindergarten going to 1st grade next year, we would end up with 1 section. That number would be 26. I just want to clarify, I went over it with Mrs. Desai again today. At that grade level, we currently have 3 special needs students in that cohort. They are going to be serviced with a special ed teacher, so they're not part of the 1st grade.
26.
They're going to have their sub-separate program. That doesn't mean on occasion they might go into the 1st grade, but they're not going to be primarily instructed by that 1st grade teacher. And as in kindergarten, there's always the question of some retention. So we're projecting 1 section at 26. At 2nd grade, which is the current 1st grade, we have 2 sections because we have 45 children. That would come in at 22.5. The 2nd to 3rd, we would have 1 section of 30. 1 section of 30. At 4th grade, we'd have 2 sections at 23.5, and at 5th grade, 24.5. All right? It's difficult when you do the math. When you have a cohort of over 40, that's unacceptable to do, obviously, a class of 40. And when we get numbers that we have to look at because of this fiscal crisis, yes, we potentially can have that. But I just want to be clear, the students that will be in that 3rd grade class, there are special ed aides that go into that room to service children. So there would not necessarily just be one teacher in there all the time. There would actually be the current design, there are 2 aides that go in and out servicing children that are currently in 2nd grade that would move up to be spending some time with the 3rd grade teacher. Not ideal, not recommended, but part of our dilemma. And again, for the general public, just to understand, under the current regional agreement, children in Blackstone and Millville in grades kindergarten to grade 5 cannot cross boundaries except children that are on special education. So in other words, under the current regional agreement, we cannot just move some students from Millville to Blackstone Elementary involuntarily. Somebody asked me, well, what if somebody were willing to volunteer to have a child go from Blackstone to Millville or vice versa? That's possible. The regional agreement does not prohibit us from doing that. However, we are prohibited from collapsing and consolidating based on the town in which the child resides if it's not special ed. But I went back and looked at the regional agreement. It would be possible if somebody volunteered, you know, to say, well, I don't have a problem with my child going to Blackstone or vice versa. All right, that's possible to do that on a voluntary basis, not an involuntary basis to do that. Now, class enrollment is also subject to move-ins and migration and changes. So it's important to note this was the data as of the end of March, based on what we know. We are entering the season when some families are contemplating moving out of the district, and they generally would notify the district sometime in May or June that their child will not be returning to school because they're leaving town and going to another community. Vice versa, this is also the time that we get inquiries from people that they're moving into town to do that. And the other variable is the whole issue of school choice. The committee will be asked in June to, again, vote to participate in school choice, but clearly, we would limit any move-ins by school choice to a class that's already up in the high 20s. We would not overload a class simply because of the school choice phenomenon. But the reality is, these numbers are always subject to some movement at this point in time in the year. And I've asked the principals, you know, come the beginning of May, which is the end of this week, to kind of reassess where we are and kind of look at it. It also does not engage, at this point, any discussions of retentions beyond current kindergarten. There's always that possibility, but those discussions are generally in consultation with parents. Those generally happen in the month of May, and we're not prepared to draw any inference for enrollment beyond what we know as of today. And kindergarten is really the point that we're emphasizing with that at this point. So this is before you. This is not pleasant. This was a difficult meeting this morning with the 4 principals and with Dr. Hahi, Director of Student Services. This represents a significant number of faculty and staff that will be impacted. But again, the number we're dealing with is not 400,000, it's 1.4 million in terms of that discussion. So, Mr. Chairman, what I'm looking for this evening is a sense of how do I proceed as superintendent in notifying parents, notifying our faculty and staff of where we're going. I think people have a right to know that, and certainly full intentions to be transparent with that. I did send out an email. It's nice to see we have people sitting in the audience this evening, because this is very serious. This is a very serious fiscal crisis for this district, and it does have a direct bearing on faculty and staff, and most importantly, on the children that we serve. I don't want to minimize what I said about class size at the elementary, because it is going to have a significant impact on the middle school, and it will have an impact on the high school. One very difficult question that both Mr. Cameron and Mr. Dudak asked me today: when will I know, because I have to build my schedule for next year? If you don't know how many teachers you're going to have, it's difficult to build a schedule. So by the end of June, to let students know what their schedule is going to look like, and particularly at the high school, you know, what are the implications for reductions relative. We're not talking about reducing any required courses, but we are talking about reducing electives, which will, again, shrink the available options or electives that students can take in order to fulfill all of their graduation requirements. So clearly, they're thinking ahead, that they need to know this information. Given the town meetings, one on the 12th, one on the 27th or 28th in May, it will be a fairly late notice. So I've already alerted them to the fact that we will not be able to build schedules in May for the high school or the middle school. That'll be an activity that will have to take place at the beginning of the June, hopefully, or even later, depending on the options as we pursue it. So again, for members of the committee, any questions that you have, these were painful to find $1.4 million worth of reductions. But again, for the audit, I can't tell you exactly who the people are that are going to be impacted by that, other than to say the most vulnerable people are the people that have been with us and do not have professional teacher status. That means this is their first, second, or third year in the district in terms of that.
Okay.
Any questions?
So why don't we just open it up? Questions, comments, discussion in terms of what, we've been through this, many renditions of this budget, and for the public, we've been talking about this since October. So questions or comments or discussion items, I would say just kind of, let's just go with it. Do you mind if Jane goes first, or do you want to?
Please.
I always
Okay.
start with Karen.
And the only reason, because the comment that you just made was you've been going through it since October, but two of us are brand new.
Yes.
And so it's really frustrating to come in at the tail end, and unfortunately, that's where we're coming in. And so I guess I have one very general question about this process before we start, because this is, as just stated, not what any of us would like to see happen. Not what any of, but, you know, working with a leadership, developing a proposal, but yet, as I look through it, and I have, I mean, you will see, pink notes, blue notes, green notes, purple notes, I mean, just a million questions being brand new. And so I don't want to say, you know, I accept this because I don't know and I'm not educated. That's not acceptable to me.
Sure.
I have to, yeah, exactly. And I just feel as if the focus of this is really educational. The focus of this gets down to the nitty-gritty of the classroom. And as I look at the purpose of this community education system, I question, what is more important to us? This education system, this education of the individual student in our system, or the experience of the school in general? Because it really doesn't feel to me like we touched, or this touches some of those extra things. And maybe it does, and maybe I'm not. I mean, I don't need to go through my 300 million questions. I will as time goes on, but
You're more than welcome to come in and
I just
give you
feel as if it's more a focus on direct teacher support, direct classroom impact, and not support staff, extracurricular. You know, and I don't know any of the people. I'm not pulling anybody's name. I don't know these people. Nothing's personal. I just want a clarification on what our goal as a educational system is. I mean, is it, you know, is it civic-minded, well-rounded person, which I think it needs to be, or is it, you know, basic education? Because I hate to see us lose math in the high school, quite frankly. Or I will not accept not having the assistant superintendent, because one of the things that we committed to was that we needed to look at the curriculum, and we needed to look at more grants, and we needed to find ways to bring more money, and a superintendent alone can't do that.
Right. So look, can I jump first?
Yes,
And then-
go, jump.
So, last year, I was in your position. I was sitting here, though.
Yeah.
And the presentation at that point was, we were closing a building, we were cutting many staff, and we were putting a roof on, so gather your stuff in a box, and, because the dust is gonna start falling at any minute. And we, as a committee, went back and looked at it and went through every line item and really cut, tell me if I'm wrong, I would say 90% of the fat out of anywhere, you know, to save, not closing a building,
Right.
hiring staff, not reducing any staff,
right.
we hired more staff. And that's where we put the $1 million in. The thing I struggle with, and I struggle with the same exact thing that you're talking about, okay? The thing I always keep coming back to, and I'm gonna say it until every town meeting is over. I see school and the purpose of school not to help students reach their potential, okay? that purpose has to be to exceed their potential. And if both communities want to be a minimum contribution community, then we will be a minimum standard school. Period, end of story. No one's convincing me otherwise. And people can think, you're paying the teachers too much, or, oh, there's stuff in the budget we can still look at. There's really not a lot of stuff in that budget. And I think we should, because I'm glad you have a fresh set of eyes to look at this. It's a bare bones budget, and for me, we could cut athletics tomorrow. It's gonna be a savings of $250,000, okay? But my kid's not staying.
No,
You know what I mean? 'Cause
neither is, yeah, exactly.
I honestly
neither is
believe what
mine.
you said. We need to talk about the whole child
Oh, right.
and the whole student. And granted, can we look at that? I'll look at anything, okay? But we have to keep that vision of, you know, I mean, the other thing that came out over the weekend was the high school rankings, okay? And I look at every one of them, okay? Ranked 1 to 50, and there's some issues with how they rank it and whatnot. But every single one of them, the higher ranking ones, were about AP courses and how
I
many are
agree.
participating and how many are passing, okay? The highest one was like a 90+ percentage participation and 90+ passing, okay? At BMR, this committee and past committees have always strived to continue to build the rigor, okay? So I'll just give you our numbers. 21% took the AP exams, and I think it was 16 passed them. Okay,
16%.
out of that 21%, okay? We have to, and how do you fix that without more money? How do you fix
And how do you
that
fix that
with
without AP
minimum
classes?
contribution? Right, absolutely.
And how do you fix that
Absolutely.
without math,
Absolutely.
extended math teachers?
Yeah, and again, we, remember that number, we have this thing called school choice. We already are losing $300,000 because we have 73 children out and only 28 in.
Yes.
That is 6 teachers. If you cut out athletics, if you cut out arts, if you cut out activities, that number will grow.
I agree.
And then we won't be looking at a $300,000 shortfall, we could be looking at 500, 600, 800,000 shortfall.
But I also,
And
I agree, I don't
so
disagree.
part of the discussion with the administrators, you know, is about the overall impact. We talked about achievement, that's the most important thing, we want all children to achieve. We recognize that has to be in academics, but we also recognize it has to be in the arts, it has to be in athletics, it has to be in activities. Why? Because children need more than just the basic R's, the 3 R's. But the reality today, we need to provide opportunities for students to grow, not only in terms of who they are academically and learning the literacy and numeracy skills they need, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics that they need, but we need to give them opportunities to participate in activities. At the middle school, at the elementary school, they need to be engaged in art programs, in music programs, all right, in physical education to help them develop their psychomotor skills. These are all part of what we should be committing ourselves to in order to recognize that we're about the total child in terms of that. And recognizing an easy target is, say, we'll cut out athletics. Okay, that's $250,000, but like I said, you would have a high school with no athletics. And you would have parents
I'm not a proponent.
quickly going, but I mean,
Nothing that I said.
I'm
Not
just
a
sharing the
proponent of it.
underlying thinking, Jane, of what it means. I mean, somebody, you know, quite frankly, Wendy asked me, why do we have $8,000 more for activities? Well, last year's budget underfunded not having advisors at the middle school for basic things like class advisors, you know, junior National Honor Society, Stu Council. A school needs those opportunities for students to be engaged, again, in developing leadership skills in order to, you know, advance who they are as individuals. And without a teacher that's willing to take a small stipend, I mean, they're not getting $8,000 to be student council advisor, but, you know, stipends of $1,200, $1,400, you know, to work with students and to help them engage in civic activity. It's interconnected. We're very fortunate that we have a, you know, high-quality instrumental music program. But I also, you know, when we look at that, parents that are engaged in that program raise tremendous amounts of money to offset many of the costs associated with that music program. Many of the extra people that are helping out, Mr. Bebo and Todd Schaefer, you know, the music parents are raising the money for that. in order to do it. And it's an identity for the high school. There's an identity around the arts at the high school, the theater productions, the choral music, and many of the other activities, in terms of student council, honor society, and other clubs and activities, of which we do not have, a whole raft of them. We really are at the basic level in order to do that. So that's what guided my thinking as your superintendent, to say, we got to look at these 5 A's. We got to look at achievement, but we can't look at achievement and say we're only interested in our scores in the MCAS areas. We got to look at, the academic areas. We have to look at the arts. We have to look at activities and athletics. We have to engage students, in a total experience, in order for them to build their individual identity and help them to gain the advantages of an academic program, but also the advantages of being able to develop leadership skills or individual talent and skills that makes them a well-rounded person. So there are no easy targets in this, in terms of that. And again, this was painful for principals. Nobody likes to see class size go up. Nobody wants class size to go up. But to nickel and dime, a music program, when parents are already paying a fee, and again, in athletics, they're already paying a fee for those participation in those activities, there's just only so many other places you can go. We consolidated our health insurance cost. We had great success with that this year. And some of the other, you've got to pay the light bill, you've got to pay the fuel bill, you've got to pay for the parking lots to be plowed. There's just a number of things in the budget that just, yes, you can cut them, cross your fingers that we have a good winter, but the bottom line is those are essentials to have in terms of that. But I'd be glad to meet with you when we did the orientation, because it's,
You gave,
yes, the binder is thick
Yeah.
with the detail.
Well, what were some of your ideas, Gene, just if there were a couple of big ones that we could kick around now before we go to Erin? And do you have any, ideas of where else?
Well, I mean, I looked at, kind of basic, kind of questions in terms of, I looked at, the number of substitutes that are, permanent substitutes in each building, or the number of secretaries in. I didn't understand, and I asked several people, and I think I have a clearer description, but I didn't understand clearly the whole JFK AFM. It seemed like we duplicated a whole lot there. In terms of supplies, it seems like they're getting more money in it's almost as if there are 2 different schools.
They are.
And they are. Yeah.
Right.
With one principal.
Well,
And
one halftime principal.
there
in
you
each
go,
one.
in each one.
Right.
Who's the same person,
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Right. And it's
So
assistant
part
principal.
of me was like, well, maybe I need to tour these buildings and really see how the operation is, because it just seemed as if there was 2 of everything, and was that I mean, is there a way to? There seemed a lot of secretarial support. There seemed a lot of and I don't want to nickel and dime. It's not to save $5 doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the contract negotiations, there's $46,000, and I realize I'm assuming that's for salary, to be able to negotiate salary increases. But it's never been there before.
Well, because you don't negotiate every year.
Oh, well.
Okay. You're in a
question.
collect,
It's
it's a good
Oh, we
question.
did we did in 2013, though, right? With the teachers.
Correct.
And there was no money there.
Okay, let me be honest, the committee knows this. I don't believe in hiding money. All right? Some people would say, stuff that money in health insurance for your raises.
Oh.
We put it in the school committee account.
Okay.
So that the school committee could sit down with the support staff and engage in what the law says is collective bargaining. All right? Collective bargaining. You don't hide the money, to do that.
So in the past, that's
Well, that's a strategy.
potentially what had happened.
A strategy is to, quote, hide the money.
Because we did
So that's why
negotiate
it's
in
there.
I mean, again, and last year there was 46 or 7, I think I counted 47 line items that were just zeroed out from when we talked about it to July 1st.
Right.
So, poof, So, but the other thing that I should have shared with you is that last year at this time, the other thing we wanted to do is have a fresh set of eyes, like you're talking about, on our whole budget and fiscal process. Okay, we were gonna go out for an audit, actually, through Mass School Business Officers. We held back on that because we had a fresh set of eyes right here coming in with 30 years of experience to look at it. So that, what he just said was a clear example of, this isn't the correct way to do it, or this is not the way he does it, okay? Which I would assume that it's not the correct way to do it, okay? And that's why you're gonna see a lot of things differently there in terms of the other addition that you'll see
So they
in
may
there.
have come, because those are a lot of my questions. I mean, they
Sure.
may have come from the technology seems like we lost a position and gained a lifetime.
Mhm.
But just
Okay, but
putting it
that's
in the
what it
right,
looks like,
right
yep.
place?
Yep. Yep. But again, I think that area right there, because we talked about that might be license agreements, that might have been put somewhere else, you know what I mean? The other thing that was very evident was the preschool program should be self-sustaining, okay?
Yes.
And it really is, it's a wonderful program, but past practice has been, that money just went kind of everywhere, you know what I mean? So, again, just like your fresh set of eyes right now, we had in August, and we were all committed to, right away, to saying, we need to get the correct fiscal infrastructure in place. And it's here now, okay? And that's why we've also heard the word assessment versus budget. I don't think that's ever been talked about here, and people in the community could talk about that too, okay? Assessment numbers are different than budget numbers, okay? So, again, and all those are good. I'm glad you have a fresh set of eyes looking at that, because my eyes are weary of looking at this over and over again. Can we jump to?
You can jump to
Okay,
Aaron.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I was gonna say other people, but.
I don't really want to
Aaron
change
wants
the
to go.
subject, though. I
Of course
just,
not. Oh, really? Do you have something
my
else you wanna talk
question
about?
was actually going back to the list of positions that you had here. I didn't quite understand the 3 FTE positions at the middle school. I know we had two that were in the previous round.
So a total of 5 at the middle school.
So that makes it 5. So the 2 that we were already presented with were ELA and reading.
It has
So
an
the
impact on ELA and reading.
The first 2. So the other 3 is,
The other 3 will have an impact on math science classes, as well as some of the electives, all right? And it will raise class size.
for electives, or,
Well,
Across the board.
and what does it do to the teams, I guess, my question.
at this point, it'll strain the teams, but we'll be able to maintain them,
Okay.
all right? But we would not, cutting 4 teachers, the impact, and there'd be no reading classes at one level, there'd be no STEM classes, no rotation of electives. Right now, Fitness for Life, Exploring the Arts, Fitness Frenzy,
That's in the middle school?
yes.
Did we get a grant for that STEM program? No.
I
I wasn't sure
We're
if
talking
that
about
STEM.
Right.
Right, but I wasn't sure if that STEM program was
We
funded.
have no
with
grant
a-
that I've put in the
okay.
budget
Okay.
for that. All right. These are additional classes beyond science, right? So you're picking it up by eliminating some of the rotation of courses. And then the biggest one would be the issue of, we've introduced Spanish
Right.
at the middle school.
So that was my,
Yes.
point of my question from 2 weeks ago, was the foreign language that we had put in there 2 years ago.
Correct.
And that would be part of one
Yes.
of the 3 points.
Yes.
Okay.
So Spanish would no longer be an
We would
option.
not be able to offer the Spanish program that we have here now, yes.
That was my first question, thank you.
So, okay, so I'm going to go back to my original
I'm
first
gonna
question.
say, hold on, because I'm
Okay.
gonna have any other people that want to jump in.
I just want to mention one thing, if I could. You talked about the budget last year and the cuts that we made.
Mhm.
So we cut 90% of any fat that we could out of it. I think the additional point that should be made is the 650,000 plus
Yeah.
that we moved from E and D
Yeah, yeah.
into
Well, that's how we
balance
did
that.
it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
But
yeah, that's how
just-
we did it,
just
yeah.
So people know that that money was there, it's
Yeah.
not there anymore.
Yeah. If people don't know that by now, Brian,
Well,
I'm gonna have an aneurysm in the back of my head.
I don't know what people know.
years though.
Again, for those that were using terms, if you look on the PowerPoint slides, the issue is the regional district, like a town, has what's called an excess and deficiency account. On the town side, they call it free cash. It's money that isn't spent in a fiscal year. It reverts to what the Department of Revenue calls excess and deficiency. A regional district is allowed to carry 5% of its total budget in its excess and deficiency account. The reason being is that during a fiscal year, unlike a school department that is a department of the town, the region cannot go back to the town and ask for a transfer from a reserve account. So therefore, the enabling legislation for a regional school district creates the excess and deficiency account because during the year. But it is not a slush fund for the school committee. The school committee has to operate within certain parameters to spend that money. We do it typically at the time you're doing your budget. When you notify the town, you're making a transfer from E&D to offset assessment. So the town's aware of it. If we had an emergency during the year, we would have to notify both towns that we have, a catastrophic failure of a boiler, and our insurance is going to leave us, with a $50,000 bill because of deductible, et cetera, and we're going to have to try to find that money, in our budget or at the end of the year make a transfer from E&D. Again, notifying the towns, because it's their money. It's not the region's, it's the town's money. And people have a right to know it. And excess and deficiency money has to be certified by the Department of Revenue, the Bureau of Accounts. It's not a number I can pull out of the sky. It actually is a fiscal balance sheet number that is submitted to the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, and they actually certify it and then send a letter back to the region, and they send a copy to both towns. So our E&D this year is $529,000, which is about 2.5%, and that's what we currently have available for certified E&D at this point to move forward. And again, because of budgeting, the current FY14 budget, I'm estimating at this point we will end with we will not go in deficit, but we will not end the year with a huge surplus of funds to go into E&D. At this point, I met with Donna Scungio today, and based on where we are with spending, we're hoping to end the year maybe, somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000. Again, it's a $22 million budget. $22 million budget. That's like a 99.997 hit on the budget. So, 50,000 may sound like a lot, but in relation to 22 million, it's coming in extremely close in terms of our expenditures for this current year. But that does not mean we're going to be able to add to that 529 number in enhancing our E&D account. All right.
Any other comments before I go back to Jane? No, Wendy?
Well, I think, okay, so you asked. So I appreciate Dr. Davis getting back to me on some of the questions, and I think it was important for me to understand, looking at these line items, because when I sat back after our last meeting and I thought about, Dr. Davis asking me what direction, I need a direction. So I sat back and reflected and said, okay, what does that mean for me? Do I need to sit back and do I need to look at this budget line item by line item? Why did I do that? Because we did that last year. Right. So I sat for 3 hours and I went through every single line item. And I thought about my questions clearly, and I wanted to just get clarity on that. And the reason why I wanted clarity is because I had a tough time, understanding, looking at these small line items, and I'm not saying $200, I'm talking $5,000, and I'm saying, how are those small line items, they add up. And if that's one teacher, then am I doing my job with direction and looking through this process? And if I can find, $20,000 in these line items, then, is that the direction that I was being asked? So I think going, having those questions on athletics, having the question on, things that are happening at the elementary school, the clubs, the questions were, to me, they were adding up. And my concern was, I couldn't see myself giving up one teacher to put uniforms that, you know, I've gone to the games. Those are my concerns. So although it's a $1.4 million deficit, I get that. But looking at this budget and asking myself, what do I do with this budget and what direction, that was my concern. So I appreciate that clarity. But, you know, that's just where I was at with the athletics and the music. Where is that money? And you know, not to get rid of sports, not to get rid of music, but, you know, looking at the amount of supplies and the amount of additional uniforms and things of that nature, does that add up? Yeah, it does add up. You know, not pencils, not paper, but those things do add up, and that was my concern, is thinking one teacher, you know, supplies, certain supplies, and I'm not saying all, and I get it, $1.4 million deficit, I get it, but that was where I was grappling, and I was going based on what we did last year, and that was looking line item by line item, saying where is this? So I just wanted to put that out there.
No, it's important, and it was an exercise we did last year.
A lot.
Right, a lot is right, and we found a lot. But I don't see it in this one. And the areas you brought up are all valid. And if we could save a teacher.
But if you take those areas that you know need to be looked at, it does add up. It you know, it does add up.
Yeah.
I would readily admit that the committee could direct me to take another $20,000 out, but I would go back to the athletic director and the principal and say, we have to make those decisions. What I found in the athletic budget was it was totally uneven. There was deferral of items, you know, such that, running some programs were, in my mind, questionable as to we weren't funding them properly.
Right.
And,
And I appreciate, you know, evening out those line items, you know, but I just wanted, you know, the public to get an understanding of, you know, after reflecting on the last meeting and saying direction, okay, I need to do my job looking through this budget and saying, even if I can get one teacher, then something, you know, we're on, you know, I found something.
right, but, again,
$1.4 million, I get it.
careful, but remember, be careful. You cut money out of a program like the arts or music or athletics, $5,000 a kid for every child that exits the district under school choice. 10 students out is your $50,000
Right,
teacher.
but that's not what I was looking at.
No, I'm just.
Okay. Because I was looking at.
It's part of my.
Right,
you know,
I understand.
I was asked very candidly,
Yeah.
what's your plan to
Right.
get these kids not to leave?
Exactly, yep.
My plan is to offer a stable budget with a comprehensive, realistic set of
Right.
programs, because we are in competition with our neighbors. Now, I have to tell you, I read the local papers, there isn't one district around us that's not dealing with the same thing. You know, one town next to us is talking about a $2 million shortfall, and then not moving forward. Another district is talking about $1 million. Another district's doing a $3 million override. You know, we're in the same boat.
Right there.
We're
Yep.
all in the same boat. It's a very difficult financial climate. You know, it's compounded by our, you know, part of not having that money to transfer out of E&D to offset the budget, you know? And I don't, you know, but I'm just, part of my plan is don't create an environment where you basically are saying to some parents, you know, choose to go to another town. Because again,
Right.
it only takes 10 kids out and you got $50,000 for a teacher to do that. Because if I had that 300,000 is, you know, revenue coming in, that would be a different story. You know, that's revenue out. It's taken off of our Chapter 78 is the way it works. We get debited in our aid, and we're losing $300,000 of our Chapter 78 to that process.
One of the things, I mean, every single thing on here is painful, and every single thing on here should still be in the budget, but I understand, yeah, cuts need to be made. One thing I'd really like to get on my soapbox for is, we hired Dr. Himmelberger. His background is very, very strong in finance, and at the time, the two candidates, one was very strong in terms of teaching, for lack of a better term, curriculum, things like that. The other one was business. And we made the decision to go with a very strong business mind, with the understanding that we would need to augment that with someone with a stronger curriculum background. And that's what's on the cut list right here, is assistant superintendent of schools to be in charge of grants, curriculum, things like that. So we need to get that position in there some way, somehow. You know,
Agreed.
we've been not neglectful, but we've been kind of drifting somewhat in terms of curriculum for a long time, 6 or 7 years, no doubt. I'm looking on this list is also department heads, the high school. We are going to need some curriculum people. Whether you call that director of curriculum, whether you call it assistant superintendent for curriculum, we need a person in there. We absolutely do. In terms of data, assessment, there's a lot of things out there that we've been just kind of letting drift. I mean, it was somewhat of an intentional move, we knew that, but it's time. We need to make this move.
And we did eliminate that position last year.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, to see 120, that line item, just
Go.
keeping in mind that the director of curriculum, that was eliminated last year, so I think,
Yeah. So I would
It's
say,
not new money.
let's try to work that back
It's not
in.
new money.
right,
No, that salary's in the budget this year,
Right.
we just haven't filled the position.
right.
Yeah. And, one of the big duties would be grant writing. I mean, it's not inconceivable that person could more than make up their salary in terms of grants. We had the BVT presentation at the Millville meeting the other day. They cut their grant writer from 1.0 to, I think, 0.6 or 0.8. And their justification is that person more than makes up their salary in terms of grants. So we definitely need this position for curriculum, for grants, for a lot of reasons, so.
I mean, I think
let's try to
this
get that back in.
committee is committed to a stronger central office, and I'm not budget on that. I don't think anyone else here is gonna either.
And that was my question.
Yeah, I know.
If this is unacceptable to me and this is unacceptable to me, we, as a group, do we direct you to find it, or can we find it?
Both,
Okay, that was my question,
both.
in my lengthy.
But again, I think we are, we have to do this, okay, right now. My hope is that there's still gonna be ongoing discussions, okay?
I hope.
Where we move from being on a daily transfusion to just really bleeding bad.
That discussion, meaning,
With the towns.
With the towns, oh yeah, there's no
I- no, I
discussion,
just-
there's no more money coming from in here, it's.
No, I
from
just
the
wanted
towns.
clarity.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the next process and how we get, what needs to happen at town meeting? I mean, there's still a possibility, nobody's happy with the cuts.
We'll go
But
through that.
when we get to town meeting, we're only 4 votes at the town meeting, because half of us will go to Millville, half of us will vote in Blackstone. It's the people at the town meeting that vote how much money the school district gets. It's not up to the finance committees, they make recommendations. It's not up to the selectmen. They, again, only have 1 vote. It's who thinks that this is important enough to come out to town meeting. And if we only have, this is representative of who's willing to come out to town meeting to talk about and to vote for a more positive school budget, then this is all we have. It's all about, what we think is important as town people. If we think that the school is an important component of our towns, you need to come out to vote, and you need to have other people who are like-minded come out to vote. Because we're only 4 votes at the town meeting. So we can talk about, we're not happy with this, we're only 4 votes for each town.
Right. So that discussion will be ongoing. Do you want to?
I just want to mention one thing that I know it's been talked about before, but one of the biggest problem as parents getting to the town meeting is child issues. They don't sit well through that 2 to 3 hour venue. Would we be able to offer some service hours to National Honor Society?
I mean, that
to-
that
In the
has nothing
past,
to do with
it's
us.
been done before.
We
We
have-
can
I
always,
know.
they're always looking for service hours, or just volunteers. We can absolutely, each town can
You can
set that up. Yeah.
Well, I think through social media, you
Cookies
see a
and
lot
milk.
of,
Sure.
can't make it, can't find a sitter, so I think that's definitely a good option to
Yeah,
explore.
I think we.
Because we need the parents.
Yeah, and that's been tried before, didn't really make any difference. But I honestly think if we can do that and really, because this is the time we need people to come out. So I think if we couldn't authorize that, but I think that we can get people that want volunteer hours, or National Junior Honor Society is always, or the National Honor Society is always looking for hours.
Can I be very clear to the, I know there are parents out there?
Yep.
All right? We can't talk about our children unless the parents are sitting in chairs at town meeting. That's your opportunity to voice your support around the needs of our schools. When parents don't go to a town meeting, and then for the next 6 months complain about the budget, and the lack of this and the lack of that, not seeing you at town meeting, shame on you for not being there. As a superintendent of schools, my job is to develop and recommend. My responsibility is to develop the budget and present it to the school committee. It's solely the responsibility of the school committee to vote on that budget. But in Massachusetts, the appropriating authority is the open town meeting. That's where parents can step it up, occupy a chair, listen to the debate, and vote. You need to be there. You can't complain 2 months after the meeting because you don't like what happened in September. You need to be in the chairs at town meeting. I can say that because I'm leaving in June. I'm only the interim superintendent. I'm not trying to alienate you, but I've been at this for over 40 years. And I can tell you districts that I worked in where we had strong financial support, it was because we had people at town meeting. But I will be honest, there are many, many senior citizens that also recognize the value of education and will vote to support the budget. But it's very disconcerting to see parents of children in our schools, elementary, middle, or high school, not there at those meetings. So I commend senior citizens for exercising their civic duty and being responsible for being there, but I'm challenging the parents. Coming to a school committee in September and complaining about class size, it's too late. It's over. July 1, whatever money we have is all the money the school committee can spend. And it's challenging for the town. So that's my little soapbox, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you,
Right.
thank you
I
for
think
that.
one other point, though, it's important that people understand that they shouldn't leave after they vote.
Oh,
They have to wait till the warrant is closed, because that can come back up again, and that game's been played, so.
Yep.
Till the warrant's closed, the vote isn't counted, so keep that in mind.
So with that, I'm going to open it up to the public forum, if that's okay with the committee members here, okay? So just to remind people, come up, say your name, where you live, and I'm going to say it one more time. We know this is the most painful process we go through. We're open to comments, we're open to criticism about the schools, about our governance of the schools. But I can't say it enough. This can't be a 1-month conversation. It has to be a 12-month conversation. Because, folks, we're going to be doing this again next year. We have to change the mindset about what town assessments are and how you value education. So with that, I'm going to get off my soapbox and open it up to public forum. So.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name's Dr. Paul Haye, Director of Student Services. I live at 130 Elm Street, Blackstone, Massachusetts. There's some ambiguity in what's been discussed this evening around the reductions. And, you know, I know what a review of Mass General Law 71, Section 16B means, but I think that needs to be made clear to the townspeople in both communities, as well as those watching on live stream this evening and those that get it as follow-up on Channel 8 and the respective cable stations in both communities. Mrs. Robin tried to explain, you know, some of that process, but I think some things have been lost in translation. Could or would you please clearly and simply explain Mass General Law, Chapter 71, Section 16B, for all sides of the table, Blackstone, Millville, the two towns, everybody here this evening, because that's something that has been questioned already. And again, I know, and I've been watching, but I think some other people really would appreciate that clarity, because just because a town or a group moves something forward doesn't mean that the process is over. And I think that's lost in translation right now, to be fair. And I know each of you have kind of commented in pieces, but as it is an agenda item as well, Mr. Chair,
Sure.
if you could do that as a committee for the public, I think it would go a long way.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haye. So I'm not going to read the law, okay, because I'm going to try to give it in layman's terms and jump in if it's too layman. basically what this law says is that if, when there is more than, when there's a regional school district of 2 communities, 3 communities, whatever the number is, for us specifically, if one town votes a budget down, and if one town votes a budget up, okay, of what we put forth as our budget,
It's the assessment.
the assessment. Then, thank you for jumping in. The assessment. Then the school committee has a right through this law to then eventually get to what is called a super town meeting, where both towns come together and do one final vote. And whatever that vote is, that vote is. If it's up, both towns have to agree with it. If it's down, then nothing happens. That's never been done before in at least our 2 communities. I believe it might have been tried in Mendon Upton maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So that's something, and we can put the law up online if you like, but that's basic layman terms. The historic, since Millville always goes first, the historic mindset has always been, well, Millville's not doing it, then I guess it's a done deal. Well, it's really not a done deal. And all we need is one of the member towns to vote the assessment up. And when I say up, I mean vote for it. Yay, okay? And we put it on here because we wanted to be clear about what the law was. We wanted everyone else to be clear about what the law was. And that's why we're having ongoing discussions with both communities. And if in the case where it does happen, where one town votes it down and another town votes it up, then that is definitely something that this committee is going to explore.
And that super meeting consists of
Consists of both towns
both
coming
towns
together
coming together.
and voting in one place, in a public forum, and doing the head count, or yay, nay, or however we do it in town meeting. It's just that it'll be a Blackstone Millville super town meeting.
That still require people to come.
Parents.
Correct.
It
And
absolutely
community
requires people to come. Absolutely. That's a given.
Just to clarify, it is actually a town meeting called by the district committee, so it's not like we have the moderator from Millville and the moderator from Blackstone on the stage. It's actually a moderator selected by the regional school district. The secretary of the regional school district is responsible for posting the notice. The town clerks assist with the sign-in to make sure that the people coming to town meeting are in fact residents of their respective town, and they can attend the town meeting. And it's a one-man, one vote. When people vote, they don't vote by town. It is a simple majority of those people present at that joint special town meeting. But it's under the control of the regional school district, not under the control of the Board of Selectmen or the finance committees from both towns. Not that they wouldn't be there, and they'd have the ability to speak, but the reality is it's different than your regular town meeting. All right? It's different than your regular town meeting. This has been tried in 2 district regional school districts over the last dozen years. The most recent one was up in the Phillipston-Templeton regional district that's known as Narragansett Regional. That district is up off of Route 2, west of Fitchburg and Leominster, all right, in terms of doing that. But again, what Mr. Chaplin said is that the regional district controls the budget and controls the certification of the budget, which is really the assessment. Right now, the region has a budget and an assessment before the towns. That doesn't mean that this committee could not meet again before town meeting in Millville and vote a new budget and recertify the budget. We can't go higher, we're at a max, but it could be reduced. It could be reduced. And again, the only action that the regional committee can take is in fact to get, in this case, as Mr. Chaplin's explained, if one community votes that number, that assessment number, and the other doesn't, that's when you could go to the tiebreaker, which is the joint town meeting. All right, which is the joint town meeting. There are time constraints and in terms of the number of days, because if one town voted against it, given that Millville's town meeting comes at the beginning of May and the Blackstone comes at the end of the month, the town that voted against it would have 45 days to call a special town meeting for the purposes of taking it up. So it would kick it out, quite frankly, into July, under the statute, because that town would have the opportunity to call a town meeting to reconsider the regional assessment number. If they continued to vote no, then the region could exercise its option to call a joint town meeting.
So at this point, if anybody wants to come up, raise your hand, we'll have you come up.
My name is Kathy Stearman. I live at 28 Boulder Court in Millville, Massachusetts. My question to you, you want us to come out to the town meeting. I'm slightly confused, and I apologize if I'm asking a question that's already been answered. As of right now, the town funds you at a basic amount, and that's okay. What you're asking for is $400,000 more
Correct.
from Millville and another $1 million from Blackstone.
Correct.
You've gone to at least Millville and asked for that $400,000, but that would necessitate the selectmen doing a debt exclusion or a 2.5 override. Or
I mean, it's up to the governing board of the town to figure out how to pay for it. Those are definitely options that you're
Okay.
talking about, as well as if there was a stabilization or free cash or money elsewhere.
okay.
So those are all options that a town has.
Just understand, the only board by law that can actually put an override question on the ballot is the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
The regional committee has no authority to, they can ask for consideration for an override, but they don't have the authority to put it on a ballot. The only body that's empowered to do that, even town meeting can't do that, only the Board of Selectmen can do that.
So as people coming out to vote at the town meetings, is there any way for us to ask for the $400,000? The way I understood it is if you come before the town meeting as just somebody, you have to ask for it, but you have to say where it's coming from out of the town budget. You have to find a place
Right.
in their budget. And so as townspeople, that is our only recourse, to go and say, really, we'd like to put in this extra $400,000, but it would mean somebody looking at the town budget and saying, where can we find that $400,000? You just can't come to town meeting and say, I don't like what you guys are giving the school committee, I want to give more.
Yeah, and that's technically that you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
And the vice chairman will be at the town meeting and would go up and speak if there was ever an amendment, okay, to that. And he would clarify that, I believe. Okay, as a resident and as a committee member, he would say, if the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee don't recommend the budget, he could then come up and say, well, I make an amendment to accept this budget, don't quote me on the verbiage here, and would like to take it out of whatever.
And I have to, cobble together, 50,000 here, 20,000 there, for whatever the amount is. Again, the high we're asking now is 400 from Millville,
Right.
$1 million from Blackstone.
Okay, okay,
But there could be lesser amounts as well. Again, that's the ceiling.
okay.
We have to determine the floor.
And I
So
think
if
it's our intention to determine that prior to town meeting.
Yep.
Somebody from the school committee would make the amendment and do the
Okay.
procedural. So what I think, then it goes to the townspeople who are at the town meeting to vote.
Okay,
To vote.
that's really what I
So,
was
yes.
asking. What are you
So-
asking of the townspeople? You'd like them there to hear what they're saying and
And
to...
vote yea or nay.
And vote yea or nay.
I do think it's also important for you to know, and the general public to know, the regional school committee is very, very aware of the town finances. This is an extreme burden for a town like Millville.
Yes.
It's not like you're sitting on $3 million and you don't want to spend it, all right? The free cash in Millville is probably just over $200,000, somewhere in that number,
The free cash right now.
or stabilization, or, where-
Stabilization is at 271.
yeah,
So your E and D is higher than our
Right.
stabilization.
correct.
The free cash is at 295, but we've got outstanding bills that are over $200,000.
Right.
Snow removal
Correct.
was over 170-something thousand
Right.
this year because of the winter.
Right.
So,
So,
how
I-
much out there?
And I understand that.
So
at
the
town's
committee has
perspective.
been very, very, very aware, and, you know, Rich has been at probably at least 20 meetings this year, you know, to advise us and listen. So there's no intent on the part of the Regional School Committee not to acknowledge the fiscal burden. But again, it goes back to the fact that the regional district last year, to bring the assessment into a number that the towns could support, spent $655,000 out of its E&D account. We don't have that money anymore.
Right.
And as I said, the 529 is a big number, except it's a $22 million budget, and that's our only ability, because we have no ability to go back to the towns during a fiscal year to deal with that. So, you know, the regional committee, I think, is painfully aware of the limitations in both communities. And I certainly, you know, echo what Mrs. Robin just said. You know, I think this committee's going to have to meet again next week and take some consideration of where we are with the budget. And if the committee decides to recommend to reduce its own budget, and then we would recertify the assessment and bring that number down.
Okay,
All right?
thank you.
And to do that. But I want to emphasize, we've had a lot of cooperation with both towns. I mean,
Yes.
we flowed a lot of information back and forth during the year relative to this issue. So I particularly applaud the selectman from Millville, Joe Raposa, who's also been at many of the meetings with Rich, along with representatives from Blackstone.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Come on. We know you want to come up and talk with us. Okay. Seeing none, going once.
Question.
Come on in.
Hello. My name is Joseph F. Gurton. I'm running for candidate of the 8th Worcester District as a state representative. I'm a Bellingham resident, although I came here tonight because I felt like this is a big issue for a town. I see that you have advocate for additional state aid. Do you feel like we are getting enough state aid for our schools, you know, as Millville and Blackstone are concerned?
No.
Not even close.
I happen to be at the State House all day today, advocating for, it seemed like a dozen issues in terms of public school funding. One is the Chapter 70 money that we get. That's the main aid that we get. That formula was created over 20 years ago, in 1993. I don't know about anybody else, but does anyone buy film anymore? No, we don't. So things change over 20 years, okay? So they did vote, the House voted to take part of looking at that and studying that a little bit more over the next year, which is more than they were doing yesterday, okay? So that's one thing that they're doing. The other two things that I've said here many times are regional transportation, okay, needs to be fully funded. And I'll tell you why. Unlike Bellingham, we're a regional district, okay? We're mandated, okay, to have a seat for every kid that we have in this district. A seat, okay? Whether they use it or not, okay? So we lose about $500,000 every year because they only fund about 50% of that, when they said they were going to fund the whole thing. They're warming to that idea. They're maybe giving more money that way, okay? Where your town in Bellingham, you can assess ridership, okay, and say, you know what, these kids are the only ones using the bus, we can reduce buses. We can't reduce buses, okay, because we're required by law, okay, to provide a seat for every kid. So that's one area that it's Chapter 70, regional transportation, circuit breaker, we always want that fully funded, okay. On the state level, they've been okay, you know, we want it fully funded. They've been 60%, dilly-dallies maybe to 70%, and that's real money that we have to come up with every year to service, you know, our special ed students. The federal government said they would fund that to 40% when they came up with it, and the highest they've ever funded was 12%, okay? You know, so there's a lot of funding issues that happen. There's a lot of unfunded mandates that teachers are told to do I think it was over 100, what they estimate, over 160 hours a year that they have to mandate do something. And that takes away from time on learning, teaching, kids, doing what their job is. So there's a lot of unfunded mandates like that that we're always advocating for, and we've been advocating for those for years through the Mass Association of School Superintendents, Mass Association of School Committees, Mass Association of School Business Officers. Always have a big lobby. We had a lot of students there today at the State House, but we probably had 150 people advocating to their legislators, saying, you got to do this. And I also had the opportunity to go and look at the House representatives as they debated some of them. I sat up in the gallery. What can I say about that? Appropriately. That was a circus, okay? And they went back and forth. Everyone has their agenda. Everyone's going back and forth. And everyone trying to sneak an amendment in, they need to understand that it can't, and I'm a big believer, this can't fall on the property tax owners. It can't every year, okay? So when I say we can't be a minimum contribution school district, I'm going to say that to the whole time I'm on here. We have to have a dialogue with stakeholders, okay, and talk about how we're gonna do this together. And that includes the state, that includes federal, that includes the towns, because, oh yeah, by the way, they're also cutting local aid, okay, so that doesn't help anything either, okay? So I want the best schools, but I also want the best police department. I also want the best highway department. I also want the best fire department, okay? There are school committees that grapple every year with how do we fund as towns, that grapple with how do we fund the schools, some of the rural ones? Well, we're going to cut the third shift off the police and the fire. Thank God we don't have to do that here, okay, yet, okay? But those are real issues. So we're always looking to advocate for, because let's face it, state, federal, local government can spend money the wrong way over and over again. And that's what we advocate for, spend it the right way.
Just an example, Mr. Chaplin mentioned it, but Chapter 71, Section 16C is school transportation for regional districts. Quoting from the law, the regional district shall be obligated to provide transportation for all children in grades kindergarten through 12, and the Commonwealth shall reimburse such districts to the full extent of the amounts expended for such transportation. However, down at the bottom it says, subject to appropriation. So the legislature does not fund it. So we get 50 cents on the dollar. We spend $940,000 to provide mandated transportation. We're getting back about $450,000. Shame on the legislature.
And I completely agree with you.
So
that
that
could be
is
money
part of
that-
our fiscal dilemma, because some people have said, why don't you do like other districts and start charging middle school and high school kids because you don't have to transport them? We don't. Our law says we're obligated for K to 12. So we can't charge a transportation fee. We can't cut back on the buses, as Mr. Chaplin said. There are many parents that drive their kids to school, but we're obligated to provide the transportation, even if that child only takes the bus once a week. And we're obligated by laws from the Registry of Motor Vehicles as to how many children we can put in the buses. You can't overload them, all right, in terms of that. So it's kind of a catch-22, but I always say, if you'd only fund the regional transportation, to the law, to the way the law was passed originally, this district would be sitting on another $450,000 of state aid, which the law says, except subject to appropriation. And there are many instances we have to transport kids under what's called the McKinney-Vento bill when a child is declared homeless. We had a student living in Blackstone temporarily. The student was originally from Boston. We had to transport that child daily from Blackstone to Boston. We split the cost with the city of Boston. That daily route cost $240. We had to pay $120 of that. And the child lived in the town of Blackstone for 6 months. We will get some reimbursement for that, pennies on the dollar. We're obligated to do it. It wasn't in our budget. We had to pay it. So there are a number of things. If your intent is to be a legislature, do your homework and realize that constituents have a right to say, you're not meeting the letter of the law that are already on the books relative to meeting your obligations, particularly for regional districts that were promised regional transportation aid. That is an unfulfilled promise that has been decades in decline in terms of putting money in that account in order to fund what is, in my view, clearly stated in law, except subject to appropriation. That's the out for the legislature. And I always say, shame on the legislature for doing it and creating these situations where we have to pay for the yellow buses. I can't put them, I can't tell you as a community, we're going to stop transporting high school kids. We're not allowed to do it. We're not allowed to do it, all right?
Now, do you see any other shortfalls as far as state is concerned? Because, I mean, that was something I was completely unaware of. Do you see anything else along those lines where we're not, you know?
I think there are a number of unfunded mandates that schools, we have an English language learner law in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that requires us to provide instruction for non-English speaking students, which requires specialized training on behalf of the teachers, to which we get no additional funding, or the funding comes a year later to do that. A well-intentioned law. This was not a law passed by the legislature. It was actually passed on an initiative petition that the Department of Education has to implement. But there's a cost associated with that, a huge cost associated with that. And the requirement is that you have the capability of doing it, even though you may not have a child in your school currently, but if a child were to move in tomorrow, the law says you must provide that program. So, you know, those are a couple of examples of some of the things that we face as challenges. The area of special education continues to be challenging in terms of a mandate both from federal and state law to provide for special education services, but there's huge costs associated with those, and sometimes there's not enough reimbursement or aid coming to the cities and towns in order to meet those obligations. You know, school choice, a nice law, but there are opportunities here where districts lose large sums of Chapter 78. Just because we lost, you know, the net of 28 kids in, 73 out, didn't mean that I could reduce a teacher, because they all didn't leave the same grade level. They were spread across the grades. So it's not like I had $300,000 of cuts that I could make in my budget because I lost, you know, that net of about 55 students, all right? So people have to kind of think, you know, what is the real impact on some of these laws relative to do it? And, you know, school choice is the law. I'm not opposed to it as a superintendent, as an educator, but I do think financially it puts a school district at a major disadvantage when you have this situation of loss of Chapter 78. You just can't make it up.
Hang out after the meeting. I'll give you the whole packet I got today from the legislature.
No,
Honest to God.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
That helps me out a lot.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that, you said yourself, what was that? You said about 450,000 to 500,000. I mean,
Correct.
that could cover the Millville cost alone. And then Blackstone and Millville could, you know, kind of meet ways on that.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a huge deal, especially for smaller towns. I mean, we can't put the load just solely based on, you know, the towns. This is a state issue as well. And, I mean, this is why I'm here, is because where are the people speaking about these state issues?
Yeah.
I definitely think that needs to be subject to change, and I'm sure some of you can agree with me there.
We agree. You should go hang out at the State House for a day.
I don't want to lose my mind that quick, but no, thank you, guys.
Thank you. Okay, no one else? Go, please, come on.
Hello,
Hello, how you doing?
Nancy Angelini. I live on 295 Thayer Street in Millville, Mass.
Welcome.
I am a graduate of 1985 class of BMR. I'm here because I want to help. There's a couple of questions that I have, and I'm not sure if the public has them as well. First and foremost, I want to thank you for the work that you do. I know it's very difficult and often thankless. If you could talk a little bit about if the town were to agree to an override, we'd like to hear about what happens next year. This problem isn't going to go away in 1 year, so I think if we talk a little bit more about, if you do this for us, this is what we're going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again. I bled purple and white and gold. I have an athlete I used to coach on your committee, and I have a daughter who's making a decision about where to go. And it makes me sad to hear all these things. So I also want to encourage you, no matter what happens, I think it's very important to assure the people that Blackstone Millville is an outstanding school. I know there are alumni watching right now. It's very important that as alumni we go to the meetings. My maiden name is Nancy Maloney, and I'm asking people who went to this school and who have pride in this school like I do to please help. It's very easy for us to say, oh, someone else will do it, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what I know about what teachers do. And I know there's a couple of young teachers, and I don't know who they are, but in 1989, I was sitting in that chair just like they are. I worked for BMR, so this is not a new issue in Blackstone. In 1989, there were about 9 of us who went through this as well. So you look back in the past, it's been a systemic issue in Blackstone, and we're trying to understand why. But when I drove in last year and I saw that horse in the front of that building, I got excited because I'm like, people are trying to bring it back to what it was, but it's not going to happen if we don't all come together as a town and as a committee. I'd like to take the time to commend the teachers. I want people to know what teachers do. I have the pleasure of working in education, so I see that every day. Teachers take money out of their pocket when kids show up without anything to eat. Teachers go home and get clothes from their kids' closet when the kids that are in their classrooms don't have anything to wear. All I'm asking as an educator as well as a parent is that we take an hour out of our day to support the teachers who cry, who hold our kids' hands, who help our kids pass tests, who tell our kids it'll be okay, you can do this, over and over and over again. I'm just asking as a town if we can just get out and give our teachers an hour or 2 of our time and make a vote based on what you believe, but at least show the teachers that you care. Because guess what? No matter what happens, the teachers who are sitting behind me are going to show up the next day, and they don't have the support that they need in the classrooms. I hear that they don't have enough paper. They have to modify paper. They have to do all these different things, but yet they still show up. They're smiling every day. My daughter came home from a track meet today, excited. The coach said this to me. The coach did this to me. We had a great time. Hey, I did this in history. I'm worried about my new history teacher that I know may lose their job. It's a reality. I understand that. It's not new to me. But what I'm saying is if we can just stop saying someone else will do it, and we all get together and work on it together. Some of the things that I'm concerned about as a parent, with all these cuts, I don't know how the teachers are going to keep up with the mandates from the State Department of Education with educator evaluation. I do not know how the superintendent of schools is going to manage all of the mandates that have come down without any help. I become very concerned about losing department heads because of the mandates that parents don't understand. Those are some of the things that are going to squeeze our wonderful teachers even more if we don't get this to happen. But I'm just going to encourage and ask, just for my own ears too, is can you talk about if people agree to giving the money up, how are we going to say this isn't going to happen again because we're going to do this, this, and that? And I think that's what people need to hear because we're going to be back here again next year, and I think they'd appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we're in total agreement with you. You know, you have a lot of educators up here that see it every day, and there's a million wonderful things that happen every single day in this district. You know, I think the first thing in terms of what we have to do is come up with a 5-6-year plan because the revenue is not going to come out of the clouds. So what we go through this year, and if they come up with a little bit more money this year, we have to come up with how the 3 entities, Blackstone, Millville, and this committee, can really forge a partnership to kind of figure out how do we do it. Because we've been putting in revenue for forever, 10 years, large sums. I don't think we can put large sums in anymore, but we can put our share in, okay, as well as, but we're not going to make it with the minimum. And I said that before. We're just not. So I think the dialogue has to continue to happen. I can't say that we're not going to ask for a little bit more money next year too. Well, the year after. You know, unless we come up with a plan. And that plan has to come over the next 12 months. I mean, we've been talking about it, you know, since we started in August. You know, we asked parents to come in August to be part of a financial subcommittee, as well as FinCom members and Board of Selectmen members. We didn't get anybody. So we're still going to stay that course. You know, we're still going to stay that course. You know, an assistant superintendent hopefully can go out and chase some other revenue. School choice can be a revenue. You know, I know for a fact that the middle school, you know, showed at least 12 students this year to come in school choice into the middle school because of the services that they can provide, the low class numbers. There is no definite answer. I'd love to say, yeah, just do it this one time. We'll figure it out for the next 5 years. I'm not going to say that.
But I think our goal before was, let's get this budget under control.
Right.
And did we do that? It's not pretty, but we did it. So that's the first step. The next step is looking at where our revenues come from. So we have made steps. They're not pretty, but we are making, I think, big gains.
Right.
It doesn't look like that because we're transparent, we're honest, and we're telling you this is what's going to happen. But are we making gains and are we getting things under control? I think so. And you know, Blackstone and Millville have many, many residents that lived here, that have parents here, that have grandparents here. And you're absolutely right, they need to get out. We didn't come back because we didn't like the town. We came back because we love the town. And I think those people, along with all the new people, need to come out because they're here for a reason. And we want to stay attractive to everybody that comes to Blackstone and Millville. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that by the schools.
Right.
I think it's important for people to understand that we have a systemic revenue problem, and that the community, you know, feels this. If I'm correct, Rich, in the town of Millville, Proposition 2.5 allows the levy to go up 2.5%. In the little town of Millville, that only represents about $98,000 a year of new revenue. $98,000 of new revenue based on the limitation of 2.5. That's a constraint on revenue. When the regional district spends one-time revenue, we don't have it going forward. So systemically, you know, the issue of an operational override is a request for the community. In order to meet our obligations moving forward, we're willing to raise our taxes, and it's not one time. It's not like a capital override. When you pass a capital override to buy a truck or to put a roof on a building, whatever the bond is, 5, 10 years, to do that, once that bond is over, that money goes off the tax rolls. In this particular case, the regional committee has said, would the towns consider an operational override? Because again, the town would be in the same difficulty if the town of Millville or the town of Blackstone uses one-time revenue to get us through this year's. We're only kicking the can down the road because they're not going to have the money next year. So systemically, it is a revenue issue. Yes, it's a budget issue because those things have to work in a balance. And I worked very hard as the interim superintendent to scrub the budget, to look for economies and be able to present, as I said, a general education budget that went up about 2.6% and a special ed budget that went up 6.7. The net was a 3.4%, you know, increase in budget. Reasonable budget increase year over year. The regional committee, I think, is now back in a place where that budgeting can sustain itself. So the growth projected could be somewhere in the vicinity of 2.5% to 3% in terms of year-over-year growth. Again, there's some outliers that are totally out of the control sometimes of the district, very expensive out-of-district special ed costs, et cetera, that we don't control. But the reality is, I think there's a fiscal awareness. But you've got to have a revenue source. The questions that we were asked about state aid. If we got from the legislature all of the money we are, in my view, entitled to under the regional Chapter 7116C, that would bring in an additional $450,000 to the district. All right? So the questions you're asking, I think, are, as Mr. Chaplin said, we have to sit down and take a long view. We can't just keep asking to spend one-time revenue and not expecting that the problem's only going to come back next year. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, it comes back at a much more severe level, because it's compounded by the fact your budget's gone up, but your revenue has gone down significantly in a way in which you have a choice. You can reduce the budget to live with your revenues, or you start exploring other revenues from the state in the form of state aid, or in the case of the community, raising local taxes to support it. But you can't continue to ask people in the town to do operational overrides every year. All right, so it's a structural revenue problem that has to be mitigated by that collective thinking. And it's a shared responsibility, because in our case, as a regional district, we're having to look at both towns in terms of their ability to raise revenue.
And part of the plan is, you've heard me say this before, how do we build a system where we're chasing excellence, okay? Because when you do that, people are going to move into your town. There's not going to be many open houses, okay? That's 12 years ago when I moved here, 14 years ago, that's why I moved here. It was between Milford, Franklin, and Blackstone. I chose Blackstone because they had a better school. It's the first thing, it's why you move back, amongst other things, because you could see your coach again, But that's part of that long-term planning. How do we continue to build this so those houses aren't empty anymore? Our property values goes up,
Houses are being built.
Right, absolutely. So hopefully you can come back and be part of the planning around that. Okay, moving forward, our upcoming meetings is next week, Thursday, May 8th. And any additional agenda items that you want now, or?
I'm assuming the budget will be our priority item, but we do have a number of housekeeping business items. I was planning to have the teacher data management team has been working on analysis of data, and I was scheduling them to come in next week, to come in and make a presentation. So that option is there. And then the folder, there are several items in there that we have to clean up and deal with at our next business meeting. Okay.
So, let's do school committee forum. Just kind of quickly go around, and if you want to share anything, you can share, or you can pass, and go from there.
Just hope to see a lot of Millville residents at the Millville meeting on May 12th. I was there last year. Last year we were pitching the additional stabilization account for the town. I stood up there at the podium and I could count. There were 6 school-age parents in attendance at the meeting in Millville last year. 6. I hope we can do a heck of a lot better than that this year. Getting off that soapbox for a minute, I'd like to congratulate Connor McNamara for pitching a no-hitter for BMR yesterday against White & Soul Christian. That was great. It's his second start for varsity, and he threw a no-hitter. So good for you, Connor.
Boy, how to top that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank all the people who came out to the Millville Variety Show. Again, it was, what is that, 7 years, 6, 7 years now? 7 years. And, it'd be great to have all those people show up for town meeting, because it was a pretty good crowd. Take both nights together and.
You could have the meeting during the variety show.
And,
There you go.
yeah. Talk about revenue enhancement. But, yeah, congratulations to everybody who participated in that. And again, that money all goes back into funding MESPA, I believe, right? And all the trips. So good for them.
As does this Thursday's free show at the elementary school. It's a math, somebody help me, arithmetic show.
Arithmeticals.
And fundraiser.
And it's a raffle mania.
Raffle mania fundraiser.
Raffle mania.
So this Thursday evening, you can support MESPA as well.
What time is that?
6 o'clock show? 6 o'clock show.
Come early to drop your raffle tickets.
Yeah, there you go. Great basket.
Okay, we had gotten this email about the contact your representatives urging to support the House Bill 457. Now, is that all of us, or do you do it as a chairman, or?
You can always send an email.
Can we have the kids do that too, get the kids involved, or?
Sure, yeah, there were a lot of kids there today, a lot of students were there today, so I think anytime you see that, I think you always email saying this is really important.
I'm not sure what we can do, as individual, school committee people, but I'm just like listening and letting you guys
Yeah.
take over and tell us what to do, but I don't know what we can do as far
Mhm.
as me, myself, and,
You always can advocate as a citizen.
well, I was gonna use my own personal email. I wasn't gonna go through the BMR, and I was
You
gonna
can.
try to contact him.
You
and
can.
I wasn't
Again,
sure.
Do both.
The only time you're constrained is when there's a vote by the committee. That is, whatever that majority vote is, that's the decision of the committee. Right?
But this bill, like, this
No,
won't
you could
affect
advocate
us.
for that.
This
Yeah.
won't affect us, like,
No.
No.
going forward
No,
right now.
no, that, we always do that. And if any questions, just email me. I'll say yeah to it, you know.
I mean, yeah, but this will take a long time before we'll ever see anything from this.
Oh, right, yeah, this is
This won't-
ongoing. We do this
yeah.
every year.
Okay.
That's an every year thing. Diane?
I just want to thank everybody for coming out. Spread the word. I think it's important to have people come out and be informed. I think social media is great, but I also think that people need to be here to be informed and to hear it correctly. So I think it's important. So I appreciate everybody coming out, teachers, townspeople, principals. I just think it's great. So thanks.
I will also say thank you. It takes a lot of time out of everyone's weekly routine, I know. I also want to touch on, and not that I have any kids that attended the prom, but I did see a lot of successful prom photos, and I know our student reps weren't here this evening, but being that the venue we were originally reserved for burned down, they quickly found a relocation, and it looks like it was a great night. I did not hear any negative. I heard good things about it, so I'm glad that went off without a hitch.
Great. And I'm just going to say, if anyone's ever stuck in terms of if they see a legislator, or email a legislator, or anything, if you could just think of don't forget these two things. Always remember, fully fund regional transportation and fully fund circuit breaker. If you don't say anything else, those are the two things that you can say. And with that, I am looking for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Made, seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.